So the panel is titled Defining and Defending Democracy in the Digital Age. What do the rise of tech platforms in the political sphere and a new generation of tech-savvy political actors mean for democracy? I'm going to be moderating. My name is Kyle Taylor. I run a civil society organization in the UK called Fair Vote. We work on election safeguarding and digital democracy. And we were born out of the Cambridge Analytica and Vote Leave scandals. So we published all the whistleblower evidence around those scandals. For people who aren't familiar, roughly 90 million people's data was taken without their consent by a company called Cambridge Analytica. And it was used in several countries around the world to target largely disinformation around the US election and the UK referendum. So that's sort of the context in which I'm joining everybody. I'm going to ask each of our presenters to offer some opening remarks, and then I'm going to use chair's privilege with a few questions, and then move to the floor and answer everyone else's questions. I want to start with Maia Mazurkiewicz. Close. Maia is an expert on fighting disinformation and behavioral changes. She's the co-founder and head of intelligence and campaigns of Alliance for Europe, among an array of other roles. She has 15 years of experience in political management, foreign affairs, and communication, including working in the Chancellery of the President of the Republic of Poland from 2011 to 2015, where she was responsible for transatlantic and European relations. Maia?
Thank you very much. Defining and defending democracy in the digital age. I mean, I think that we had a very interesting panel when we really discussed to go to people and talk about it. And right now here, again, we are in the digital space. But when we are thinking about disinformation and when we're talking about disinformation is doing to us, I think it's important to look at the broader scale, because often disinformation is misleaded by fake news and talking about the fake narratives. But to be fair, for us in Alliance for Europe, we believe that disinformation is changing the attitudes of people. And disinformation is one of the biggest problems in the current world right now. Because if we're looking at what happened or what is happening right now in Ukraine by Russia, Russia is the actor that is spreading disinformation to manipulate, to destabilize, and to polarize the societies of the Western countries, including also, of course, Georgia, Ukraine, and others. They do it on purpose. They have a very strategic views on how to do it and how to spread it. And on the other side, here we are, NGOs, political parties, oppositions, trying to defend democracy. And often that's not very sexy. Because what we really need to have, and that was also said in the previous panel, we need to have a vision. If we really want to go and talk to people, because that's all about. It's a bit about, talking and having a path to the minds and hearts of people. And that's where disinformation is flowing. Disinformation is very much getting into the emotions of people. And while we are making the opposite fight, we're often going into the minds and having, long discussions and great reports and books, but we are not really able to communicate in a way where people are. We are sitting and saying that people are not reading enough of books, but we are not really trying to get to people where they are and actually sit in here and listen to them. Because listening is the most important thing. If we really want to defend democracy, we need to understand what people want and what democracy is for us, and think what this vision to have is there. And social media, disinformation is nothing new. It's been there since the beginning of ages, since the beginning of Roman empires. But right now, we have the social media, we have the new technologies that basically are attacking our brains through different levels. That was, said by Goebbels that a lie that is repeated 1,000 times is becoming truth. Right now, it's enough to repeat it 3 times. You sit in the social media, you watch YouTube, and you see something, and then you go to the restaurant and you listen exactly the same thing at the other table, and then you go to a person that you trust, and you hear that, and you just directly start to believe that. So we are having a threat and we need to defend it, but the defending is taking a space. So I believe that what we need to do in order to change and fight with this information. We need to take a space and change the way we are communicating, make a simple and good communication, and use the techniques of the modern technology, communication to take over the narrative on stage. And thank you very much for being in here and looking forward for the great discussion.
Thank you, Maia. Next, we're going to hear from Nino Dolidze. Nino is a civil activist and freedom fighter from Georgia. Currently, she's the executive director of the International Society for Fair Elections and Democracy, which is a key election watchdog in Georgia. She's participated in more than 20 domestic and international election observation missions.
Thank you. Hello. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for this very wonderful conference during today's. And I'll try to talk about elections and disinformation and how we are trying to defend in Georgia. But what I see is very common in all countries which are affected from Russia, but disinformation in general. And as Maia mentioned, Russian propaganda and disinformation is not new for Georgia. We have been struggling more than 2 centuries. But when we have moved to this digital era, we really see that Russian disinformation, which was copy-pasted by some authoritarian regimes very well, is really reaching bigger society right now in an easy way, cheap way. So we are really trying to somehow stop it, or at least try to defend our democracies and our elections. So my organization really realized that a big portion of election campaigning has moved to social networks. And since 2018, we started to monitor elections not only with traditional methods, what we are doing for a long time now, but also we started to look to the social networks and monitor social networks. And we developed our own tool with the help of NDI, which was tailored to the election monitor. And what we saw is that, there is campaigning in social networks, but also what we see that there is violation of legislation in digital and social networks, and also disinformation. But I do not call it only disinformation, but information manipulation in order to discredit opponents, in order to destroy opponents. And this is all not only disinformation and fake news, but it is affecting the informed choice. And when we are talking about human rights, you mentioned that rights of voters, it's very important for the voters to have informed choice. So what we are also looking is that, for example, according to Georgian civil society organizations, we approached Facebook. We have very good relations with Facebook, and we asked them to switch on ad library, which gives us the opportunity to see money spent in social networks, because before it was very close, you could not see, and now political parties have to declare what they are spending. But the biggest challenge here is that many of the actors, especially non-democratic actors, are hiding their official campaigns, and you could see official campaigning, but also non-official, discrediting anonymous campaigns, which are supported by the political actors, but you cannot really see. So this is again another challenge, that there is political actors in social networks and you cannot see. And the worst part is that according to several polls in Georgia, and I guess it's the same in other countries, the second biggest source of information about elections has become social networks after TV. So that's why we think it's important. And these non-democratic actors have really learned how to use each platform in a way that to target the audience. For example, in Georgia, Facebook, which is the biggest social media network, is used for elderly people because they easily believe whatever they see. But younger people who does not really use Facebook and they move to Instagram, TikTok, we have seen use of TikTok, huge use of TikTok in elections by these malign actors or non-democratic actors, and they are targeting youth who doesn't watch TV, but the TikTok content is 1 minute video, so they are trying to spread this disinformation and propaganda there. And finally, what I want to say is that it is not only elections, but of course the politics in general. And the human rights, representative from human rights was talking about hybrid regimes. Georgia is now in stagnation. We were moving forward, but unfortunately we are also kind of competitive authoritarianism. And our government has really very well learned how to use like disinformation propaganda methods. And even like I was hearing yesterday how, for example, here war was used against like for the elections. The same happens in Georgia. Like all social networks and digital platforms are used to spread information that do you want war? We should be silent in order not to have the second war, what is happening in Ukraine right now. Or creating fake poll, which is based on the question like, if West asked Georgia to be involved in war, what should be Georgia's answer? And of course, like biggest part of the society would say, no, we don't want war because we had 2 wars in 30 years. So how pro-Russian groups, but unfortunately authoritarian type of regimes are using these social networks, digital platforms in order to affect public opinion. And mostly the problem is that they are using it to create non-existing problem, to divide society, to create polarization, and to take attention of the people from real problems to non-existing problems, like who is starting war in Georgia. I mean, you doesn't want to start war in Georgia. So I just want to finish with the words that we really know that social tech and social network is so good because everybody really has chance to get information and spread information. But at the same time, whether it is bigger good or whether it is tool under the hands of authoritarian regimes to influence societies. So we should think about that. And also, one big question is social networks are not regulated. But regulation will be against freedom of expression and, freedom of speech. So which is better? This is also a big question in Georgia, to regulate or not to regulate, because then it may be used against democracy as well. So I'll stop here and then I'm glad to answer your questions.
And as well, the European Union is currently moving through regulation through the Digital Services Act, the UK as well through the Online Safety Bill, and other countries as well. So we are really in the exact moment of having this specific debate. I want to bring in Lisa Rappel. Lisa is the International Federation of Election Systems' Senior Global Social Media and Disinformation Specialist. And I am so proud of myself for being able to say that.
My business card is this
and has engaged with a wide range of actors in more than 25 countries. She also serves on the board of the Observatory on Social Media of the Global Network for Electoral Justice. So her other business card is also this big.
Thank you, Kyle. It's a pleasure to be here and to be on this panel with both of you. So IFES, my organization, has been around for about 35 years. We've worked in more than 150 countries. We have offices in about 30 plus countries currently. And the benefit that brings is this comparative picture, to look not just at the challenges of a particular country, but to look at how are these challenges manifesting in ways that are similar? And when we think about what can we do, what are solutions, what are interventions, to start thinking about applicable practices and scaling some of those different components. And certainly a commonality that we see, not just in the countries where we work, but globally, is this recognition that the narrative of democracy is failing, that in this information ecosystem in which we're currently existing, that the forces that are pushing polarization, that are pushing autocracy, that are pushing security over freedom seem to be winning the information battle in a lot of different ways. And whether it is causational or a correlation, that it seems to be that the rise of digital and social media is aligned with that same pattern. So when we think about what do we do about this? I'm a practitioner, not an academic. And pulling sort of on Olga's remarks this morning and some of the conversations in the workshop yesterday, if we focus on the specifics, what's the step in front of us that we might be able to take? There's sort of a few pieces that I wanted to bring to the audience's attention as we think about what can we possibly do to turn this tide or to change this narrative? And so pulling on what Nino was just saying about the online space and domestic political actors, that of course foreign disinformation and the influx of illicit funds that are fueling information campaigns is a huge component of this. But we're also increasingly seeing that domestic political actors are finding that the game of manipulating the information environment is now the rule book you have to play by to compete in politics as it exists currently. So that being said, are there rules of the road that sort of exist about what types of behaviors are permissible in the context of campaigns and elections, that we can start to think about what does it mean to even extend those to the realm of social media and digital media. So specifically when it comes to, for example, online advertising and online campaigning transparency, we're starting to see, in my role, I'm starting to see little pockets of innovation that are happening from both the civil society, academia, election monitoring side, and also from the institutional side, these organizations that suddenly have a mandate to oversee online campaigning and are trying to figure out how to do that. But as a planet right now, I feel like democratic actors are all trying to figure out, what do we do about online campaigning? So we can look to examples of civil society organizations that are finding ways to look at ad transparency data that's coming from the platforms and compare it to political party spending reports, to look at what does it mean to craft regulation around detailed disclosure requirements for political parties that are more in line with what digital advertising and digital expenditures actually look like. We've seen examples of innovation where, well, the platforms aren't giving us the data that we need and want. What would it mean for to create an independent database with some sort of coalition between CSOs and institutions that require political parties to be disclosing their political ads independent of the data we're getting from the platforms. So there's all these little pockets of innovation. So IFES is launching an online campaigning transparency community of practice. So we can sit in a room, have a really specific, wonky conversation about how do we do this in practice and really accelerate the rate at which democratic actors are able to innovate and learn from one another in this space. Another specific area where we're finding some insights and some paths forward is when we talk about this notion of abuse of state resources, the ways in which incumbents take advantage of the means of the state to give themselves an electoral advantage. That we haven't figured this out, but it's certainly a place where civil society is looking hard. But there's parallels when it comes to social media as well. How are the social media accounts of government actors and official institutions being used in the context of campaigning? What pressure is being put on civil servants for actions that they might take on their personal social media accounts, perhaps while they're at work, whether they're harassing or brigading or expressing party propaganda? So that's the ASR, abuse of state resources, that's happening on social media. But also, how can social media be used using some of these techniques of open source investigation to start bringing to light other instances of offline abuse of state resources? So, for example, monitoring for instances where people are campaigning on the expenditure of public funds. Oftentimes they post about that on Facebook or on Twitter, and it's a way to actually start aggregating and getting a picture of where political actors are engaging in these types of behaviors. One very brief last example, and then I'll wrap up. This is something that IFES works on quite a lot because we work a lot with election commissions, election management bodies. Now, I caveat this by saying this line of work is really most helpful and perhaps only helpful when you're working with institutions that are nominally independent, that are not subject to state capture, and where elections actually have integrity. But it is worth highlighting this global trend in which election officials, election institutions themselves are under attack, where commissioners are being harassed, and where political contestants are sort of creating the narrative of, oh, our elections don't have integrity, whether or not they do, because they're then able to capitalize on that with their political supporters to cast doubt on the entire democratic process and the electoral process, which democracy is the loser in that instance. So we work a lot with election commissions, but also we do see examples where we do have credible election management bodies that are partnering with civil society organizations, both to be a source of information when fact-checking organizations, for example, need quick access to check facts about the election, or concurrently, the ways in which election management bodies, often with really tiny budgets and really tiny public relations staff, are trying to message about voter processes, about the integrity of the process, but they can't get the word out themselves. So understanding that this narrative, that having trust and faith in election management bodies when they deserve it, is something that needs to be part of the broader communication experiment. I was there.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. Okay, I just want to start with a few questions before we go to the floor. I was really struck in the opening remarks by the statement, democracy is not a state of being, it is a practice of becoming. And we've always worked with another sort of similar adage, which is that elections are a democratic event and democracy is a way of life. And that it really infuses every aspect of your being. Coming from the US and UK context, working for Hillary in 2016, watching the disinformation campaigns rise, and sort of seeing more sort of hubris exceptionalist democracies see that maybe they're not so exceptional and they're also at risk, I think has been really eye-opening. But those countries still aren't there in understanding the scale of the problem. And I'm regularly called an alarmist in my day-to-day work. And what I want to know from each of you is do you think we are already in a democratic emergency? And if so, is the rise of social media-driven disinformation campaigns a symptom or the cause?
I'm happy to start. Just 2 weeks ago, I've been in the GlobSec and in the roundtable about cybersecurity. I've heard from one of our experts saying, "Oh, war in Ukraine is a wake-up call." And I was like, "Oh wow, really? That's a wake-up call?" I think that we really been in the wake-up call, like back in 2008, back in 2014 when Russia first time invaded Ukraine, and when they used back then a huge disinformation on Ukraine. And basically then we did nothing. Because that's what we have the tendency to do. We just react and we think, okay, nothing else we need to do. Like giving you the example of what you said, in 2015, I've been working on the elections in Poland, and we lost, or the current governmental party won, hugely based on disinformation. And in 2015, nobody really understood it. But in 2015, we had a huge emergency of the refugees, and the Kaczynski was basically coming there and saying that the refugees are bringing the diseases, that they're going to be raping our women, and basically was winning with those narratives. And those are very easy narratives to give to anything, because we as humans, we are afraid of something that we don't know. And the refugees are having, for example, a different color of the skin of us. If we are living, and we all are in the Central Eastern Europe in a very homogenic society, it's very easy to give this kind of tendencies for. And then what we've seen as well back in 2017 when we did the big research, because when I was talking at the opening remarks about listening, I believe that listening is also making the research and checking what your society is thinking. And we've been doing the research there on how the Polish society is really looking at the European Union. And of course, there's 80% of Poles saying yes to the European Union. But when you go deeper, and we did the segmentation, we've seen that there's 20% for and 20% against. And then there's 60% that are saying yes, but it can easily change the attitudes. And we also did the social listening. So we've seen that in the internet, most of the information about the European Union were negative. Right? And then we went to the focus groups, and in the focus groups, we actually seen that the Polish people, in every single focus group, when we did it from the small countryside to Warsaw, in every single focus group, there were people saying that they are against the Ukrainian migrants coming. And we already back then were having 1 million. Right now in Poland, it's almost 4 million Ukrainians. Mm-hmm. And we had an amazing Polish solidarity, driven, by our hearts and love and solidarity, and wanted to help. But right now we have the situation that we have 3 times more refugees than we had in 2015 in the European Union, just in Poland. There was 1,800,000 refugees coming in 2015. We right now only in Poland are having almost 400 million Ukrainians. We have problem of fears, of depression, of the mental health lack of support after pandemic. We are coming with the economic crisis, and we have disinformation flowing where we make a research very widely, like starting smoothly, saying, oh, Ukrainians are having better than Poles. Oh, they're having the free healthcare system or easier way to go to schools. And those are exactly those kind of things. So if you're asking me if we are in the emergency, we're in the huge emergency. And if right now we won't realize that we need to go and basically talk to people, make sure that this is a crisis. We need to put money in there. We're going to have another crisis within the European Union. And I mean, it can end up in the very bad way. So the wake-up call, it's been 10 years ago.
Yeah, what to add? I will just say that for some it was 2014, for us it was 2008, when Georgia could not really prove that it was not Georgia who started the war and it was Russia. And now everybody really saw. So that time maybe we didn't have social networks to show the pictures, or I don't know, we even had the same in 90s when we lost our territory. So I just want to say that yes, it has started a long time ago, but like world just saw it. And problem is that this was from Russian coming, this disinformation, but now, as we mentioned, other authoritarian regimes are using it very well. So it's emerging problem, it is rising, and I'm really afraid that in this information war, we will come to the point that people will not believe any information at the end, and then we will have to think about integrity of information in general. So yeah, lots of effort should be spent, I think, in this, because it's really increasing, and whatever we are doing, we are just following, but we cannot prevent. So because we are like fighting against something big, which is strategically planned. So I think we should also look from the strategic point and to do some preventive measures and not to follow always what we have.
Yeah. No, I would certainly concur with the idea that the emergency is here. I'm usually loath to rely on U.S. examples, but certainly as a U.S. citizen looking at the most recent electoral cycle and some of the numbers that we saw about widely held beliefs in the U.S., including something like 15 or 16% of Americans believing in the QAnon conspiracy to some degree. So we're talking about tens of millions of Americans who think that a child sex trafficking cabal is running the world.
Run by Hillary Clinton.
And by the way, Trump is their hero, so now it's Putin as well as his friend.
Right, and even when we look at Stop the Steal, there's a majority of Republican voters, a significant majority of Republican voters in the U.S. think that the results of the last election can't be trusted, that there was significant electoral fraud that swayed the outcome. And so when we start to look at the scale of this problem and this emergency that exists, that it's not a matter of, oh, we're going to get those fact checks out there, that there's something fundamentally that's gone from the foundation of polarization, of citizen trust, and that when we start to look at that scale, that the interventions that we look at are much, much different than we're going to find a digital solution in a back room somewhere. Their engagement maybe at the local level through decentralization, rebuilding trust from the ground up. But I think it does, when you use the word emergency and you put that scale on it, you have to start thinking that big too, as well as what does a solution to this look like?
Just one more quick framing question. So we talk about the actors as the enemy, the producers of disinformation. I just wanted to very quickly touch on the business model that's used by most large tech companies, which is free for the user. But of course, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And their real customers are advertisers looking for eyeballs. I wonder if you think that business model is compatible with democracy, or if the business model itself is part of the problem.
I can actually jump in on this one. When I look at the broader regulatory conversations that are happening right now, I think, how can regulation shift the incentive structure or shift the business model as a broader lens to bring to this? And I say that because I think you're exactly right. When we're looking at for-profit companies that are publicly traded, whose legal financial responsibility is to maximize profit for their shareholders, they are doing their legal duty when they are capitalizing on our attention and bringing us down holes of despair. That shift in their business model is where I don't necessarily see it in the Digital Services Act or the other regulatory pieces, but I'm curious about how can you shift incentives and shift the business model.
There is actually something, not maybe in the Digital Services Act, but it is in the Code of Practice, the strengthened Code of Practice that was just signed on the 16th of June. And that's where it's not an act, so it's something that the European Commission is supporting, but it's 34 actors, including the big platforms and the civil society, co-signed, and they are talking about changing the demonization of the system and kind of changing in this way. I don't believe that it really happened in the way how we would like to. because we are part, as Alliance for Europe, of the People versus Tech coalitions, actually together with with Kyle, and we've been advocating in the Digital Services Act, and right now we're working as well on the transparency of the political actions, political advertising, and yes, we need to push for changing this system, because it's not only on the platforms right now, and it's also basically making us polarize even more, to basically keeping us in the bubbles, making the algorithms where we really cannot listen to one another again when we have a different views, but it also affecting our media. Because if you look at the media and how the media are structuring right now with the clickbites, sometimes if you seriously look at the titles that are out there, they have nothing in common with the article, and they have nothing in common with the truth that is out there.
Yeah, so from our point, we do not we do not have that much contact. We only have one contact with the Facebook as a platform, which has some regulations. For example, they are looking at coordinated inauthentic behavior, and whenever we have investigations, we are giving them, and they are taking down. Also, whenever we have some investigation related to money spent, they are trying to also look to this. But this is the only cooperation we have right now. So I think we should also, as you mentioned, push for the kind of social responsibility, because it's affecting the democracy as well. So this will be something that we together, democracy supporters, should push to these big platforms to take the responsibility.
Thanks. Okay, great. I feel like we've touched on the big top line stuff, the business model, governments, disinformation actors themselves. So if we want to...
Government actors,
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So what I want to say is that in some of the countries which I have been visited within this disinformation, they have stratcoms which are supporting civil society organizations to debunk disinformation, and they have some strategies. And this is also a problem that in countries which are using disinformation itself, stratcoms are also a problem. So I think we should also think about how to strengthen strategic communication units at the governmental level in order to support civil society organizations to fight against disinformation. And same applies to the election administrations and election management bodies. Whenever they are free and independent, it's good, but sometimes they are not independent, and supporting them becomes problems again. So this is something we should think about.
And we definitely need to watch out as well, because what happened in Poland, the government was trying to use the fight with the disinformation in order basically to put more control over people and more,
So it's used as a paragraph.
To use it as a paragraph, use it as an act, and basically control more what is happening in the social media in the way that they can do. So I think that's also kind of struggling. And we also actually had Ministry of Justice having their own troll farm.
Government-supported trolls.
Yes.
So this is such a sort of cutting edge right now issues, and there's so many pieces to it. And I want to see if we can capture questions from people here. Yep. In the back. We'll take these two, and then go 1, 2, 3, and then we'll do another round.
This wish is quite common. I have 2 points. I think regardless of information being correct or false, there's a problem, because in social media there are companies which take money to present a political campaign or something else, which can put accounts which automatically send messages to people. That becomes artificial. It's no longer social. So that's a huge problem with social media. What do you think about this? That's my first question. I believe it's against our rights to be regulate disinformation. It's a tricky road to go through, because when we look at the history, we have wars, we have heroes, we have events in the history. Are they really correct? The information coming from the past, are they really correct? I mean, Disinformation was there for thousands of years. It's not something new. My point is, we should be the one to judge if it's a disinformation or if it's correct, not a government or an institution.
Okay, so we'll pick, and then second question.
Yeah, it somehow relates to this, and I think we're coming from extremely different contexts. Because what for you social networks looks as a threat. Just go to Belarus, go to Russia. There's no social networks, and then you are just fine. Thing is that social network, the social media, is an agent for change. There's no other ways in these hybrid or whatever authoritarian regimes. There's no other avenues to raise your voice. And so that's the only way. And the problem, as Nino phrased, that, totalitarian regimes have learned digital tools. No, the problem is that you have not learned your digital tools. And it is not that these guys are learning. So social media with less regulation in that respect, especially what relates to the area to the east from here, the better it is. Because right now, when Google and Facebook abandoned their their business model in Russia, they banned all the advertising, and guess who's suffering most? The Russian democratic forces, they are suffering most because they cannot get out, even if they pay money. There's no way to get out. And the last kind of illustrative example, we just did a survey in Russia, and among the readers or the citizens who use Telegram as the main information channel, support for war is 10 times less than those who watch TV. So in these areas, your problem for disinformation of a social network, an alternative, is not a better social network. It is the TV, it is the outdoor, and it is the dictator's administrative pressure. So long live social networks, the more unregulated, the better.
That is an opinion.
Yeah, and I love the opinion. Provocative is. So my comment and question would be this: that social media are like tools, right? And these tools are supporting any regime, any source of power. So we know from philosophy that media is the one who actually source of power, right? So, and we know example of United States where we have this strong connection of the private sector and money from the private sector through the lobbying coming to the public sector. It's crazy, like some sort of corruption. And it's still working, it's not solved. So we have right now these big tech companies that are doing the same stuff. They're providing tools for anybody that could make, what anybody can influence. So how can we break this link? How can we stop this social media or this mechanism stop to work for just elite, for exclusive groups of people, and start to work for civil society, for all of us? So we all will be stakeholders in these mechanisms. Is it possible?
Should we take them in reverse order? Yeah.
Just jump in.
Or just jump in. Go for it.
Yeah. So I'll just follow. I was not saying that Georgia is the country which and civil society was against hate, even regulating hate speech in the country, because we know that it will be used against us. So I'm not saying that I'm supporting the idea of regulating social networks. This is the just idea which is around, because in established democracy, it is easier to fight. But when you have the developing democracy like Georgia, people are vulnerable. So that's why this is the question, but there should be some regulation, because it is not only disinformation, but it is security issue. Because sometimes it goes beyond just disinformation, and sometimes it relates to, for example, Georgia being again under Russian influence, and this is national and security issue, and that's why this discussion is there. But in general, of course, we do not support regulating social networks, and I think this is the biggest achievement of people, as they can receive all the information. About the history, I can say that we cannot now change the history, and what we know about the history is that whatever was written, of course, the history was written from the, I would say, country's historians, and it may be like written in a positive way, of course, and we cannot change that. But at least what we can do is that whenever we are in this time period, we can really defend what is true and false and leave it to the next generation. Of course, we cannot change the history, what we have from our, what we have from the previous years. But yeah, I think we should still defend what we have right now, because whenever there is spread information that Bucha massacre was done by Ukrainians, I think, yes, this information should be debunked. Unfortunately, it is there that Mariupol's theater was done by Ukrainians, and some people believe who doesn't have other information, including in Russia. So this is the problem, that we should try to talk about truth and give information to the people what is true. This is my answer about the history.
I'm going to try and answer that gets at a theme that I think was emerging in all of these questions. I think you're right to point to sort of the potential pitfalls of regulation, but I also push back because I think the conversation about regulation often gets limited to thinking about regulation equals content moderation or regulation equals content decisions. And I think portraying social media as sort of neutral tools or neutral platforms is a bit of a mischaracterization, in the sense that these are tools that have particular architecture that push users unknowingly to make decisions that seem like they're in control of them, but in reality, the ways these tools are designed tend to push towards some outcomes more than other. And so I think you pointed to a really great example where the algorithms of the news feed, for example, can push political actors and journalists towards specific decisions that we've seen political actors reporting, yeah, I have to put really negative content on Facebook if I want it to get any sort of likes and engagement, that these are the types of things that are pushed forward. Or even I remember in the wake of the 2020 election reading about internal conversations that were happening at Meta, where there were teams that said, let's design new architecture to try and push the users of the platform towards more sort of healthy, positive civic engagements. And there were sort of decisions within Meta to quash that, because in the United States, where the decisions were being made, when you started to design this architecture, it tended to have more significant ramifications for one side of the political spectrum versus the other. And that this was deemed as a reason why politically this is a no-go. We can't do this. But there are different choices we can make about the architecture of these platforms, perhaps through regulation, though that is tricky.
For me, it's not perhaps. I mean, maybe back in 2017, I was thinking whether regulations are good or not. And in general, I'm a lawyer and I believe that less regulations is better. But for the internet, there's no other option than to regulate it. Basically, a part of the world where everything was possible. And I'm coming from Gdańsk. A few years ago, my mayor has been killed at the event of the charity event in Gdańsk. He'd been killed because there was a bunch of hate speech and disinformation spread years before he was killed. He was killed by a person that was seated in jail, there's actually a story about the national TV. Municipality did the research when they've seen that there was 1,773 fake and misleading information about it. And that's how it changed behaviors. So basically, if we want to stop those things that can happen in there, people can die. And we need to understand that. And if I'm talking about the regulations, I don't want to have a body that will be telling me what is true or what is not. Regulations are not about that. Right now, what we did, for example, with the People versus Big Tech and Alliance for Europe, we were advocating to have in the Digital Services Act a need for the platforms to have a very easy place where people, we citizens, can say that we believe that something is not true and is fake and it's misleading or is a hate speech. So there will be a possibility when finally in 2024, hopefully the Digital Services Act will come into force, where we will be able to kind of mark it. And then there will be a mark and say that, watch out, it might be the information that you're having in here might be fake. And that's what was already happening with COVID, right? Because 2.5 years ago, there was a small percentage of people that have been believing that the vaccinations are hoax. Right now, it's a normal discussions that we are having in here. And it happened because of disinformation, because a lot of very good information coming from the media and the governments, because nobody knew what is happening with the pandemic, nobody knew about the vaccination, so it just went out there, and then people started to say whatever there are. So that's why the regulations are needed. But no, those regulations, I'm not saying that they are the ones saying what is true or what is not. And if I'm going to reply to the question or maybe remark of are the social media are bad? No, they are not bad. But some of their business models are bad and that they should be changed. But yes, we need to use them. We need to make the research. We need to make a proper campaigns, 360 campaigns. I mean, Nike is using it. Coca-Cola is using it. Putin is using it. Why we can't?
+1.
Yeah, I just what I would add is like I think we have to be really careful not to take the idea that these companies are an anathema for democracy or reform, or that they're simply the alternative to an authoritarian regime. I mean, the first is evidence, right? So if we look at the Arab Spring, not a single country that democratized through a social media revolution is still a democracy 10 years later. And I think that's largely because we cannot forget their business model and their ownership model. Facebook has 3 billion users globally, and one person controls the board. 57% of all shares. And so I think we're not talking about, again, content regulation. We're talking about, is this model more like our democratic societies or more like authoritarian governments? And the businesses themselves almost operate like authoritarian governments. And that's where I think a lot of the view is coming around needing to do something to reform that, to make sure that its interests are in society's interests as well. Because it's a lot of power to control what 3 billion people see, when you can move them away from a shared reality, which is so fundamental to our ability to function as a society. And that's where it becomes a global issue very quickly, because these companies are worldwide. So let's take a few more questions.
And I'm just going to add one thing. If you look at the metaverse, that's even more scary. Because
yeah, and the metaverse is the
metaverse is the new universe where people can be depressed, have no life in the offline life, and just be online all the time and having their whatever there is and just be controlled. I mean, Matrix happening pretty much.
1, 2, and 3 in the yellow.
I just wanted to say that I think this all is actually a because we're dealing with the distribution. And throughout the budget century, we had, an editorial profession on political jobs. They, and in well-functioning societies, they shaped the political discussion. They had to do certain bounds of their responsibility, and in that functioning society, they did not. You had incitement to, every time you make a ability, you have the incitement to violence and political instability by any whether it was radio, whether it was Reformation, and the religious wars out in printing, mass circulation, newspapers, and the Spanish American War in 1998, which directly addressed the this stuff happens. Social media is no different fundamentally. The question is how to get forms of distribution of content that fit within the norms of a democratic society without also giving dictators the excuse to use regulation as a device to shut down the debate. I would suggest for some proposals emerging now that aren't featured in the Digital Services Act. They're not, or by the defenders of Facebook, because the defenders tend to adopt a sort of reflexively libertarian approach, and the anti-disinformation space has become, I'm afraid to say, a consensus that if only we somehow shut this kind of stuff off, we would be able to go back to an area where everybody watched PBS. But everyone doesn't want to watch PBS. People want to watch other things. So, but there are proposals now for allowing people to choose their distribution algorithm. In a very primitive way, this is technically possible on Twitter, where you can choose to have the timeline or its algorithm. The question is, how do we think about transparency of choosing your distribution algorithm? Can this work with a feasible business model
In the same way as you used to pick a newspaper and say, well, I'm going to buy the Daily Mail or I'm going to buy the Guardian, and you get a different algorithm in each case, but it's still quite clear what you're getting. It's not looking like you're signing up to one kind of algorithm, getting another. You do know, and you have that choice.
Question in the back?
You're first. Linking slightly to what Garland has just said, I'm reminded of the recent article on the Parsons blog by Johannes Buchheim and Gilead Abiri, which highlights the difficulties of content moderation and fact-checking as a counter to misinformation, and the dangers with that in terms of control of knowledge and information, and suggests that the best way to counter disinformation might be through regulation, but in a different way, which would be to insist on mandatory diversification within social media usage. So everybody has to be exposed to a certain level of information outside of their echo chamber to prevent to destabilize certainties in terms of ensure you are being presented with contrary points of view. I wondered what the panel thought of that as a regulatory solution or part of a regulatory solution to these issues.
Thank you. Yeah, another name for it is sometimes called universality algorithm. So 40% of content must be universal to every user. Yellow jacket.
Now, this report here may include a use of personal data. And then in some places, they're seeing things like uncontrolled sharing of personal data between CSOs and the state actors that are later used by state actors to influence election outcomes. And is that something that you're also seeing in your countries? How are you responding to this? What do you function?
That question is actually deeply related to disinformation with data. So, and just take the green shirt gentleman, last question. Okay, we'll take these two questions, and I think that'll be near time. Got one last question to the panel about hope at the end. Go ahead, who wants to start?
I will start then from the last question because it is related to what we also do. Like what you were talking about yesterday, like sharing with civil society and the government, we don't have that sharing, and we do not have also evidence of private companies or anybody sharing with government, but we have the results when we see that some voters are affected by this shared information. So what we have is that personal data is probably shared, like personal data of the voters probably shared to the political parties, for example, who are campaigning, to the government, state agencies, but we do not have the evidence sure. So what we have very good legislation about personal data protection. We have also the person and institution who is protecting. So there were several cases about that, and there is no proof how private companies are sharing this information to the political actors. No evidence. No evidence.
It's quite well protected in this sense. What I'm afraid more, if we're talking about the data sharing, is the agreement that we're giving, for example, to the big platforms, and basically they're using our data to everything and to do the advertising. And I mean, they probably know that as well. You're talking about something, or you're searching for address or for something, and then you're basically seeing the advertisements right in there. So those are kind of the things that I worry about in terms of my privacy and in terms of where we are going with the privacy world. And basically, if we're talking about the political actors, of course, those are the data that the political actors can use as well while doing the targeting advertising in the social media, right? In this sense, if we're talking about the algorithms, I very much agree. Yes, it should be a super transparent way of choosing what you want to see and what you don't want to see. There are possibilities right now in the social media to actually kind of change the algorithms that are out there, but it's very difficult to do it still. So I hope that discussion will take place and will be more pushed forward. And talking about it, I also believe there's one thing that we didn't really touch upon yet, that is education. Mm-hmm. And it's not only education at schools, but it's awareness campaigns and basically talking that, yes, there is a problem of disinformation. Yes, if you're seeing something that is highly working on your emotions that you fear after reading it, that's most probably disinformation, so check it. Be aware that we are right now having the same amount of information during one day that our ancestors did during the whole lifetime. So we are not able to fact check everything. So basically, this media literacy and critical thinking should be basically as it is in Finland, and we discussed about it yesterday. That should be basically something that should be in every single school, that should be in every single newspaper, done by every single NGO, be on billboards, and people should know that, yes, this information is out there and it's affecting you.
I would just jump in to acknowledge, I think it's a great question. As in the conversation we had yesterday, I appreciated the point that you made that we have to understand the problems of data and how it's being used before we can even think about what would it mean to design a solution. So just by way of saying, thank you, I appreciate the conversation we had. I've certainly already incorporated that into my thoughts about what is this conversation about abuse of state resources. To touch on the first question, I think the solution you're suggesting is one example of what we were talking about earlier in terms of the architecture of the platforms themselves and how can it push you towards particular decisions or particular outcomes. And I think that any intervention, including like the one you mentioned, I think there's a lot of things we can hypothesize would have a positive impact, but we can't really know until we would have the opportunity to actually look at data and sort of see what this would look like in practice. So I think hypothesizing about solutions is great and part of the conversation around what are we pushing the platforms to, whether it's algorithmic transparency or some of these other components. We don't know the answer yet, but let's keep hypothesizing and figuring out a way to confidence testing.
And just say, I believe the BBC is testing over multiple years a universality delivery for 30 to 40% of content, which would hopefully offer some insights that would be useful into how it changes behavior. Okay, my last question, again, now we're keeping people from lunch, is just 30 seconds from each of you on what, the one thing you like to leave people with, hopefully offering some hope to improving the problem.
30 seconds is short, but what we are saying is that, people are, yes, under influence of social networks, and we are talking about the algorithm, which is shutting doors and doors, and people are becoming in their small bubble, and they cannot really reach other information, which is threatening us. But, for example, what I want to say from yesterday's Georgian example, there we thought that people were under influence, and they were just in their bubble. Yesterday there was demonstration in Georgia, and 120,000 people went outside. So this is proof that sometimes we really think that people are under influence, under propaganda, but when it comes to really important moments, people realize and understand everything. And finally, what I want to say is that alternative is still in-person communication to the people, and also media literacy and critical thinking, which is very, very much.
I will say that we need to take over the communication, and we shouldn't be afraid of using the new technologies and using really the new communication techniques. We as Alliance for Europe, we have the Disarm, we use the Disarm framework that we're currently building the software on it, and will be open source. It's definitely something for the CSOs that can use, and we are supporting CSOs and different organizations as well to make their communication better. And I'm very happy to talk with you about it and support you in this. And let's not be afraid to go on the social media and communicate the way that we really go and we listen to people.
Whenever I feel doom and gloom about the technology and democracy conversation, I go and listen to a podcast or read an article about Taiwan's digital ministry and Audrey Tang, their digital minister. And I think it points to, we worry so much about the downstream negative effects of technology, but what does it mean to introduce technology that enables participatory governance that's designed in ways that pushes citizens towards commonality and consensus around shared challenges. And it's a lot of, it's just the models of GovTech, CivTech, participatory governments coming out of Taiwan just make me excited for what the future could look like.
Great. Thank you all very much.